Hello everyone, this is Erik, the Asian movie enthusiast. In an earlier video in this playlist, I believe it was 2004 part 1, I rattled off the number of Asian horror films that I saw for each year, from the late 1990s all the way through to the early 2010s. I mentioned that the total number of Asian horror films that I saw in 2011 was the lowest total since 2003. And we will, of course, cover all of those movies in this playlist. But I will only need 3 videos to complete this task. We've been doing 4 or even 5-part videos for every year since 2004. And yes, we will return to 4-part videos when we reach 2012. So the point I'm making here is that the overall production seemed to dip a little bit during 2011, at least in terms of Asian horror films that are available internationally. Again, I obviously have not seen every Asian horror film, but my sample size of over 700 titles does give us some insight into industry trends, and the industry seemed to dip a little bit in 2011. So of the 26 Asian horror films I saw from 2011, I actually enjoyed 17 of them. Now that's a pretty solid success rate. Unfortunately though, a good chunk of those 17 titles I would rate as merely watchable films, and that's in my opinion. So you may think that most of them stink. There's always an element of subjectivity when assessing movie quality, but when I look at what I've seen from 2011, I can only come to the conclusion that this year is one of the weaker years for Asian horror in recent memory. And again, it's due to the overall quality and entertainment value of the past grade films. But with that said, there are certainly some films from 2011 that are worth watching, and even some that are legitimately impressive, I think. Now I'm going to rewatch some of my favorites from this year over the next few weeks, and we'll discuss those in part 3 of this video. Actually, I'm really looking forward to that because I haven't seen most of those films in years, and I'm interested to see how they hold up. But that's not the task that we have in front of us for this particular part of this video. Oh no, we have a big vat of dumpster juice to swim through tonight, yes. But first, we have some honorable mentions, almost all of which I would recommend. And remember, these are films that some people might classify as horror films, but I do not. We have Silenced from South Korea, which is an excellent film about child abuse. Kotoko from Japan, a very good dark drama from Shinya Tsukamoto. Blind from South Korea, which is a good thriller. Spellbound from South Korea, which is a romantic comedy with some light horror elements. Osama Game from Japan, which has a horrific premise, but is very decisively a suspense thriller, I think. Guilty of Romance from Japan, an exploitation film from Sion Sono. And finally, Toilet of the Dead from Japan, which is a zombie film that I really classify as a comedy first and foremost. Now, I would actually recommend all of those films with the exception of Toilet of the Dead. I thought that one was kind of dumb. So let's get started on 2011 in Asian horror. And as always, titles for all of the movies I discuss will be listed in the description box below. And as usual, we begin part 1 with the worst Asian horror film from this particular year. In 2011, well, there's a pretty clear winner, I think, in this one. And that is The Man Behind the Courtyard House. This is a Chinese horror film, I believe from the mainland. So 4 college students travel to a desolate woodlands for a surprise visit at a relative's house. Simon Yam answers the door, poses as the gardener or whatever, informs them that their relatives are traveling afar, and then allows them to stay a few days so that they can attend a local festival. He alleges that he's a distant relative of some sort, I believe. So of course, everything turns out great and they have a wonderful time, right? Nope, he's a psycho killer. So the horror elements during the first third of this movie get off on the bad side. They got on my bad side early. This is pretty bad stuff. There's a scene involving a meat urn that's almost pathetic in how it's directed and scored. You won't know what I'm talking about unless you've seen the film, but if you do what you're told, you'll never see this film, so it doesn't matter. Everything in this film is just so awkwardly presented. This is one of those movies where every scene feels wrong in some way or another, whether it's the editing, the direction, or the acting. Some scenes actually feel incomplete because they abruptly cut away at awkward moments or in the middle of dialogue. Like, I kid you not, if I remember correctly, I think some scenes cut away while someone was in the middle of a sentence, or at least it seemed that way. At the very least, the sound fades as they're finishing their sentence, and then it fades into a new scene. Really low-grade editing in this movie. I think the fancy term for it is the mise-en-scene, or something like that. So, some other scenes are just flat-out stupid. Kind of hard to describe this movie unless you've seen it, but don't watch this crap fest. Now, the middle third consists of a lot of dull filler, and pretty awkward dance scene that feels like it should have been in a different movie altogether. The final third consists of some of the lamest killings in recent memory. All of the deaths are completely bloodless and are poorly constructed. Almost nothing is shown on screen, which is a big bummer. That's not an overstatement either. This is pretty terrible, even in terms of just a basic slasher film. There are some pretty talented actors in this. I mentioned Simon Yan, but he's not given much to work with, so his performance comes off as rather dry and one-note. I have trouble pronouncing this actress's name. Zhang Jingchu is also in this. She's a good actress, and she appeared in a romance film called La Cuna back in 2012, which I liked very much. Also, some of her earlier films were nominated for awards, and she received some acting awards for them, but I have not seen them. But yet again, this actress, not given much to work with, wasted talent. Now, I briefly mentioned the scoring earlier. The music in this film is an abomination to the ears. It's generic and unintentionally humorous. So, if I were forced to name one positive thing about this movie, I would say that there is one decent suspense sequence during a temporary blackout, like right around the 30-minute mark, I think. But that's one scene in an entire film. So, overall, the man behind the Courtyard house is insufferably incompetent on almost every level. Now, the availability on this, if you seek to torture yourself, it's actually difficult to find, but it is currently on YouTube without subtitles. Alright, our next film here, oh man, this one was a big disappointment. This is one of the bigger disappointments in Asian horror that I had around this time frame. And that is Sleepwalker, a Hong Kong horror, thriller, drama hybrid. Yi has never imagined a revolving dream haunting her every night would involve the nightmare in real life. So shortly after a dream man enters her gloomy life, this sleepwalker woman is set back again by a past broken relationship and becomes a suspected murderer. The clearer her dreams develop, the more real the accused crime appears to her. Did she really kill while sleepwalking? So it's kind of a muddled plot synopsis I got there. I think I might have got that from IMDb. The plot synopsis is confusing, and so is the film. So most of the time, when I watch a movie a second time, I end up liking it a bit more than I did previously. Well, not this time. I watched this bad boy a second time not too long ago. Wow. I borderline hate this piece of crap. I rewatched this one, I think it was a few weeks ago. And the only thing that I remembered from my first viewing was Angelica Lee's goofy haircut. And that's obviously not a good thing. So this movie, again, is painfully awkward. Right from the opening scene, this is awkward. It's kind of easy to laugh at this because it's incompetent on almost every level. Very flat, with no rhythm to the storytelling. As I mentioned before, it's confusing, but not in a thought-provoking way. More so in like a sloppy, poorly written way. Not a film that proficiently builds a mystery, I could tell you that much. On the contrary, it stalls the mystery and goes in seemingly random directions with it. very badly written film. The scoring, again, this might be a theme tonight. Very low grade, cliched, and blunt. Not something I would expect from an Oxide Pang film. Yes, this is an Oxide Pang film, and I almost couldn't believe it while watching it. The scoring, you know what? It isn't just low grade, it's awful. It's just horrible. This is kind of like the laziest kind of music you would find in a film. It actually takes you out of the moment in its stupidity. It's so contrary to what you're seeing visually that it's, man. Actually, you know what? It actually is consistent at times, but then it goes over the top in its bluntness. Is it a sad moment? Cue the violins. Is it a scary moment? Throw in a crescendo. You know, it's like, this is real bad stuff. Now, in terms of positives, I do like the set designs and some of the use of color. Sleepwalker does look nice, I'll give it that much. But even when I identify a positive attribute to the film, there's a negative aspect to it. You know, with a title like Sleepwalker, you would probably expect a lot of dreamy imagery, but you get almost none of that in this film, and I found it to be a little bit disappointing. It really didn't play up its premise very much at all. Now, I do like Angelica Lee in the lead role, even though she was given little to work with in terms of script writing. But overall, this movie is very hard to sit through, mostly because it fails quite badly to generate interest from the viewer's standpoint. I really did not care what was happening at any point in this movie, nor did I care about the resolution of the core mystery to it. So, you know, in other words, it's really boring to watch. And there's a big reveal that occurs at one point. I just shrugged my shoulders and was like, really? Like, I don't care. So, this is arguably Oxide Pang's worst solo effort. In fact, I would say it definitely is. A great premise, but shoddy execution that kind of leaves everything feeling clumsy. So, good luck sitting through this piece of crap if you decide to. This is not good. And Sleepwalker is unfortunately available on Region 3 DVD with subtitles. Alright, next, we move to Japan. This one is called Lost Harmony. On a fairly cool day, weather-wise, a group of schoolgirls travel to a mountain resort to practice their choir songs, but experience violent accidents and deadly assaults instead. So who is behind these horrific events? Is it an outsider or one of their own? So they begin dying one at a time, of course, but can they identify and stop the culprit before they all bite the dust? So one big problem with this movie is that there is too much downtime and filler material. There's lots of scenes showing girls sitting around, walking around, doing nothing especially interesting. After a while, I would say about 30 minutes, this movie gets very irritating in just how you're just waiting for something to happen. You know what I mean? It's one of those flicks. So once you reach a scene where a girl gets her hair caught in a fan blade, and a scene where a girl cuts off her own finger, you may as well just turn the film off. Better yet, don't even bother watching it to begin with. So Lost Harmony, I would say, it fails because it gives you nothing that you would expect from a film of this kind. You know, there are no good death scenes. The killer uses some kind of a hatchet, actually, but the camera always cuts away during the killing. So what's the point? You know what I mean? Also, the characters are quite whiny. You may want to smack a few of them in the face, I'll tell you that. Now, on a positive side, the production values are actually pretty good in this, even if the locations are somewhat limited. There's actually a few very nice shots early on in the film, my favorite being like a creepy pond image at dusk that he uses right near the opening credits. There's also one background scare using a mirror reflection that was subtle and pretty good, but that's about it in terms of positives, so I do not recommend Lost Harmony. Now, Lost Harmony is available in Region 2 DVD without subs. Alright, our next film here is another one, kind of like Lost Harmony, where I saw the trailer and I thought it looked pretty good. This one was also a disappointment, even though I had a pretty good trailer. And that is Hong Kong Ghost Stories, a horror comedy anthology from Hong Kong, of course. So this is an anthology of 2 short horror films. They're about 45 minutes each. The opening scene is kind of a little introduction of sorts, where a handful of life-sized paper human dolls come to life and seemingly prepare themselves for the development of their own films. They set up like a camera and like a stage and stuff. There's a dude with a hat who seems to be a director. You kind of get the gist of it. It only lasts a few minutes, but it does start things off fairly well in a charming fashion. Now, the first film is called Classroom. It's about a substitute teacher who is assigned an unruly classroom that harbors a dark secret. This is directed by Wong Jing, who, that should immediately spell disaster because he's an atrocious director and perhaps an even worse scriptwriter. But this is not entirely terrible. In fact, I would say that it's simply unimpressive and mediocre, which is quite an accomplishment for this director. The lead actress is decent. Her name is Jennifer Che, the younger sister of Nicholas Che, the man whose name I pronounced wrong for about 5 videos before correcting it. And he's very popular, and rightfully so. I like him quite a bit. Jennifer gave a decent performance in this film. Nothing great, but she successfully portrayed a likable character. Some of the scares are not as sufficient. You get a lot of basic stuff in this one. Slamming bathroom doors, running faucets, poorly rendered CGI blood pouring from walls, etc. With that said, there are a few moments that are pretty good, I think. Script and story really don't add much of anything noteworthy, so they don't really make up for all the other mediocrity. They actually solidify it, so I actually thought the twist was quite lame in this one. So this one, the first short story, not very good. Now the second short story is by a different director, but it's actually worse than the first one. A group of Hong Kong friends attend the funeral of a Thai girl they met while on vacation. She apparently died in some kind of auto accident. So this feels more like a Wong Jing movie than the Wong Jing movie we just saw, even though it wasn't directed by him. So why do I say that? Well, because the viewer is assaulted with obnoxious low-grade humor right from the start. There's more screaming and dumb gags here to shake a stick at. I don't know, I didn't like the tone of this one. It just, it was really off. And since the humor really doesn't work well, it gets on your bad side pretty early. It also uses some cheap jump scares, which I'm not a fan of, and the serious dramatic moments are not very effective. This one's pretty bad. So, unfortunately, I do not recommend Hong Kong Ghost Stories. It is available on Region 3, DVD with subtitles. Alright, our next one here is another Dubious Blind by... So, I don't know what year I covered the one. There was a movie called Manhunting that I covered in a previous video on this playlist. And it wasn't very good. I think I compared it to Surviving the Game with Ice-T and Rutger Hauer. I wonder if I'm remembering that right. I compared it to a movie that was American and low grade, but the low grade American movie was much more entertaining. And Manhunting Redemption, well, that's the same thing. So, a girl is kidnapped by a cloaked man, taken to a desolate woodland area, and then set free to be hunted to the death. This is a sequel to the film Manhunting, and from what I could tell, it basically involves the sister of one of the girls who was captured. She goes into the wilderness to find the culprit. She brings 4 people with guns and camouflage outfits, but can they protect her from the crossbow-shooting villain in Manhunting Redemption, the sequel to Manhunting? So again, this is, Japanese horror action hybrid like its predecessor. This movie did have potential to surpass its predecessor, and it's not like the first film was good in the first place, so it's not a hard task to accomplish. The premise of the sequel sets itself up as a true woodland battle. Since our protagonists this time have the advantage in terms of weaponry and numbers, they go out there to take this guy out. Unfortunately, has a number of the same problems as its predecessor, despite having more action mixed in. So within the opening minute of this movie within the opening 60 seconds. You see a girl running in the forest. She trips over her own feet and hurts her knee so the killer can nab her. Not exactly an impressive start. There's a big altercation near the 20-minute mark that is decent. I thought it was a decent low-budget assault scene. But it represents the best sequence in the film, which isn't saying much. The action in this is very low grade, lacking in style. It's only 80 minutes long, but some scenes still feel drawn out. It still drags. So in a nutshell, you can definitely skip this and not worry about having missed anything. You can skip its prequel or its predecessor as well. So I think these were movies that I saw on Yes Asia on DVD, and I'm like, ooh, manhunting. There must be people getting hunted in the forest. This could actually be pretty good, but no. So our final 4 films tonight, okay, are a slight step above the titles that we just covered, if only because they're not as obnoxious or as incompetent. That doesn't really mean that they're good. And the next film we're covering tonight is called Horror Mansion, The Blinds, and this is from Japan. So this is an entry in the Kojuncha Project, in which 3 of Japan's foremost horror manga creators wrote and directed films based on their own works. So that's pretty cool. All 3 of these films were released in 2011, and we will cover all of them in this playlist. The horror film The Blinds is directed by Ochazuke Nori, creator of such manga as Hime. So one night, Sakura witnesses a murder through the Venetian blinds of her apartment in a housing complex. However, she is unable to identify the killer because they were wearing a mask. But the more Sakura thinks about it, she begins to suspect her older sister's boyfriend is the culprit. So this 60-minute film is rather low-key, and it does make a real attempt at being suspenseful. But the interaction and dialogue lacks the nuance to really make it interesting. I tried to put my finger on why this doesn't work well, and I think one big reason is that it lacks an edge, resulting in lots of dull filler instead of impending dread. The script and acting are also subpar, which doesn't help. I read somewhere that Yoshihiro Nishimura was supervisor of gore effects on this movie. This is the same man who gave us Tokyo Gore Police, which may give you the wrong impression about this movie. There's not much violence in this one, so please adjust your expectations accordingly. On the positive side, there is one good death scene, the piano score is quite effective, and the twist is somewhat surprising, but it's simply not enough to drive 16 minutes, you know what I mean? So I say go watch Rear Window again instead. So Horror Mansion The Blinds is unbelievably widely available on DVD. This is one where I bought it off of Amazon because there were no reviews on there. Thanks. You know what I mean? Next one. Pretty generic title here. That is Nightmare. This is a Chinese horror film. So the website Neko Neko's Movie Litter Box provides a very nice plot synopsis to this, so I'm going to quote and paraphrase it here. A young surgeon, Lei, has been constantly tormented by weird dreams and incidents of sleepwalking since she experienced the tragic murder of both her parents as a child. One day, she meets by chance her best friend from her orphanage days, who is now married to Lei's ex-boyfriend Feng. When her next-door neighbor becomes entangled in Lei's complicated life, it seems to trigger a series of inexplicable and deadly things. First, Feng goes missing, and then Lei finds herself being stalked by the creepy girl ghost from her childhood nightmares. All the while, more people in those dreams begin to turn up dead for real. Is she the murderer, or is there a more supernatural reason for it all? So this is the second Chinese language horror film about sleepwalking that we've covered in this video. Hong Kong dropped the ball and couldn't pull it off. How about the mainland? Did they do better? A little bit. I do think that this is a marginal improvement over Sleepwalker, but not much of an accomplishment. Nightmare does have some effective atmosphere and lighting in spots, which I think are the film's best aspects. There's nothing new here since there's plentiful blue lighting during the night scenes, but it is executed fairly well throughout the runtime. Unfortunately, there are some annoying jump scares and cliches, genre cliches as well. There are also certain plot points that never really receive adequate development. This includes the opening sequence. They think they would reference it more because it seems like a pretty pivotal event. Didn't really seem like it got proper development later in the film. In addition, the lead actors are below average and Jillian Chung is mediocre in a supporting role. So overall, Nightmare had a competent and effective visual style, but it was not supported by other aspects of filmmaking. So Nightmare is difficult to find. I think I saw it on YouTube, actually, but I couldn't find it this time. Kind of a generic title, so it might be difficult to find just because of that alone. Alright, our next film tonight is from Singapore, and that is 2359. A rumor had been circulating like wildfire amongst the soldiers. A mad woman living on the island near them had died at the exact hour of 2359, and it is believed that her spirit had returned to haunt the soldiers at the exact same time. Now, one of the recruits, Tan, the introverted platoon outcast, is adamant that he will be the next victim of the mad woman's spirit, so he tries to convince his buddy, Jeremy, that the woman's spirit has been visiting him every night. So Jeremy laughs it off and claims that there's no such things as ghosts in the world. However, during the 24-kilometer road march for the platoon in the forest, Tan is found dead by the river. So his limbs are all contorted in a strange way, and there's an expression of deep fear on his face, which is common in Asian horror. So overwhelmed with guilt, this guy Jeremy decides to investigate this guy's death, convinced that it was not an accident at all. So little does he know, of course, that the truth will unearth a terrible dark secret. So this is only the second Singaporean horror film that I've seen. The first was the generally acclaimed film The Maid from 2005, which I found to be a bitter disappointment. So is 2059 a better film? Not really. That's particularly disappointing too, because there are quite a few reviews of this one on the internet. Quite a few positive reviews as well. So it did get attention, but didn't work for me. This is kind of a generic run-of-the-mill film that has very boring characters. Some of the films tonight have different flaws. Either it's just general incompetence, a dull filler. This one has very boring characters, especially the protagonists. I found the pacing to be a serious issue with this film, since none of the actors really held the screen well and none of their respective roles were particularly interesting. Story didn't make up for it either, since this is a by-the-book affair on most fronts. 2359, though, it's not really a terrible film, per se. It's just very hard to sit through. I felt like nothing happened during much of the runtime, so I will say that there is one creepy moment, though, during near the end, but by that time, I don't think anyone will care. If you want military-based horror, check out R Point or GP506 instead. So 2359 is widely available on DVD. That's true. Alright, last film tonight is actually pretty highly acclaimed. I might take some flack for this one. Did not like it. And that film is Ladda Land from Thailand. When a family moves to Ladda Land, an upscale housing development with large, beautiful homes, they discover life in their new neighborhood isn't so perfect when they encounter a series of terrifying paranormal events that drives the family to the edge of insanity. The father of the household is a marketing executive, if I remember correctly, and he moves into this neighborhood with an upgraded, higher-paying job. So basically, he's moving up in the world. But then, a gruesome murder of a maid sets off some disturbing events. So like I said, this movie gets a lot of really positive reviews online. In fact, I've read dozens of reviews and could not find one that was negative. Well, I've seen it twice now, and I was left unimpressed both times, so I think my opinion on this is pretty much final. Premise, again, very cliched. I don't know if anybody could deny that. Not necessarily a problem if it's executed well, but unfortunately, I don't think it is. The script tries very hard to be dramatic, but it had virtually no impact on me whatsoever. I had problems connecting with the characters, in this movie, despite the fact that the entire premise is reliant on the viewer's ability to relate to this common middle-class family. It's kind of hard to pinpoint the exact reason for why I didn't connect with them, but it seemed like there was no charming interaction between the family members. They all seemed very stiff. Some reviewers have cited the social commentary that criticizes capitalism, but I found it to be pretty shallow and not very insightful or interesting. I found the social commentary in Ho Chung Pang's film Dream Home to be a little bit more interesting and engaging. And that film had great death scenes, so huge upgrade. Now, Ladda Land is, I think, further hampered even more by the scare tactics, which consist of too many cheap jump scares, man. Too many cheap ones in this. Scoring is pretty good when the loud boom noises are not blaring in your ears, but there's a lot of those too. Not my bag of tea, not my cup of tea. So this movie has a few pretty good moments here and there. It's not terrible, but I found it to be mostly underwhelming. But again, I like to tell you when I'm in the minority on an opinion, and I'm definitely in the minority on this one. So you may want to check it out. Ladda Land is widely available on DVD. So that concludes part 1 of our journey through Asian horror films released in 2011. We've thankfully cleared the films that I've disliked already, so be sure to join me for part 2, where things will hopefully get a little bit less painful. And as always, I will see you next time.